It's 12:04. I would like to greet all of you in the name of Institute of European Studies and Hans Seidel Foundation. And as planned, we will start with the opening of the conference, and two heads of the two institutions co-organizing this event will address to us. First, I give the floor to Mr. ĐURKOVIĆ, the director of the Institute of European Studies.
I'm about to start to be serious. First of all, thank you all for being with us today. And I wish you all, first and above all, good health, which is now not only about physical condition, but more and more becoming connected with the general mental health, which we are really about to start to care for even more in some way. On the other hand, I'm also really happy that even in these not really pleasant times, we continue with our more than fruitful cooperation with the Hans Seidel Stiftung. And just briefly to show that actually in the meantime, since we had the last common conference we organized together in December, actually in the meantime we got even the published the very nice proceedings from the book from the conference organized by our colleague Irina Milutinović, of course in cooperation with our Belgrade office of Hans Seidel Stiftung. It's really very good proceedings with 11 very nice addresses dealing with the current problems and issues in the media politics at the Western Balkans connected with the Euro integration process. Then we hope that this will also bring to one fruitful year, which is ahead of us. And I can only hope that maybe, hopefully, starting from the autumn, we can see finally each other live. In the meantime, we continue with these very useful and nice seminars. And I'm happy that our colleague Uroš ČEMALOVIĆ started to deal with the issue of the new politics of integration, new methodology as we are dealing with today. As you all know, this is very interesting practical issue for all of us, but on the other hand, also theoretically very interesting change in the general politics of the Euro integration that is behind us. So without further ado, I can only greet all of you and congratulate to our colleagues that have invested quite a lot of time and energy to have us all together. And I'm really hoping to learn quite a lot today with more than distinguished guests and presenters that we'll have ahead of us. Thank you all very much, and I pass the floor to Professor FIESINGER.
Dobar dan svima. Hello, everybody. On behalf of Hans Seidel Foundation Office, I would like to welcome all to this online conference with our local partner institution, Institute for European Studies, represented by my dear colleague, Miša. We have a very short and narrow time frame, so I will try to keep me short. However, let me greet all national and international panelists, and also officially I would like to express my special pleasure to welcome among us Professor Goldner Lang. Normally, as I just said, I welcome her on behalf of Hans Seidel Foundation Office Zagreb. Now I can do it on behalf of our Belgrade office, which is represented by Mrs. Dagmar Konstantinović and Jelena ďURKOVIĆ. Let me mention also this about our cooperation with EIS. We have some cooperation since 2017, and I would like to remember to the last two conferences, because they are, so to speak, some basic preconditions to today's topic. Shortly after the Western Balkan EU summit in May last year, we analyzed the Zagreb Declaration, we analyzed the aftermaths, hopes and disappointments, that in this declaration was mentioned only some European perspective, but not, as it was hoped, some EU perspective concretely. And in October, we had also some conference about the contents of the European Commission progress report about Serbia. And both topics lead us to today's question, if this new methodology for EU accession negotiations can contribute some more acceleration or is creating some new obstacles. We know that this new methodology is some replacement of 35 chapters to these 6 clusters. We know also that it is intended in this methodology at the forthcoming negotiations with Northern Macedonia and Albania, and this also will maybe replace the current chapter negotiations with Serbia and Montenegro. But if this new methodology really will bring some better gradual step-by-step accession, as it was emphasized by European Commission, this will the future show, and maybe we will get some answers today. Let me only hint that it is also within this method predicted some improved mechanism of sanctions in case of severe infringements of human rights within the application countries. But it must be added that, as I know, such a suspension clause has been already in force since 2004. And also this common practice that all matters according to democracy, rule of law, and so on, within chapters 23 and 24 are up to now opened at the very beginning and will be closed at the end of some negotiations. So that means the question is really what it is new, what it is old, and what this does mean for Serbia. So we have 2 interesting hours in front of us, and I give back to the moderator. Thank you very much. Hvala vam na pažnji.
Thank you, Mr. ĐURKOVIĆ. Thank you, Mr. FIESINGER. So this conference does not have a concept of keynote speaker, as you probably have already seen in the program. But if this were the case, then the gentleman to whom I'm going to give the floor now, Mr. David Hudson, would be the keynote speaker of this conference. Mr. Hudson works for the Directorate General for Neighborhoods and Enlargement Negotiations. Mr. Hudson, the floor is yours.
You have to unmute yourself, Mr. Hudson.
My apologies. You missed my joke, which was such a bad one, I'm not going to make it twice. Listen, I thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today. I thank you even more for not putting on me the pressure of being the keynote speaker, because keynote speakers are normally interesting and vibrant, and I'm a civil servant who works for a large bureaucracy, and our aim in life is never to be interesting or vibrant. Hopefully, though, our aim is to inform and to explain, and so I'd like to do a little bit of that today here with you. I think the first thing to do And we're going to go through in quite a factual way, looking at what the revised methodology is and what it brings, and then leave room at the end for the questions. We've already heard one or two questions, but leave room at the end after the other speakers to have a broader discussion and to be able to go through any questions that there may well be. So let's start from the beginning. So, I mean, obviously, the revised methodology, and it is revised, not new, and I think that's an important thing to say from the outset, that we're engaged in a process which is evolution, not revolution, and that we are building on all of the existing work that we've had to date. I worked out just before this meeting, I've been involved in EU accession in one form or another for most of the last 23 years. And over that time, we have seen a process which has evolved, which has kept the same fundamental principles, that the accession criteria are the Copenhagen criteria, but which has evolved in the way in which the process is designed, first of all, to ensure that the country is fully prepared, and to ensure that our member states are fully satisfied that that preparation has taken place. And so the revised methodology very much fits into that sort of evolution that we have seen over the last, in fact, in the case of the Copenhagen criteria, 25, 26 years since they were first elaborated. Obviously, it goes without saying that, you know, the revised methodology fits into our belief that we have a firm merit-based perspective for EU membership for the Western Balkans. It's in your interest, it's in our interest, and we believe that it's a geostrategic investment in a strong, stable, and united Europe. The revised methodology, if you look at the chronology, followed on from our Western Balkan strategy of 2018, and I think it's important to recall that the Commission's communication wasn't called the Western Balkan strategy. That was what it was colloquially known as afterwards because of some member state concerns. But our communication of 2018 was called A Credible Enlargement Perspective for and Enhanced EU Engagement with the Western Balkans. And front and center in the strategy was the need to reaffirm and ensure that our enlargement perspective was there, understood and credible. And that following on from that, the revised methodology is very much intended to be able to bring the process to the, to those broader political objectives which we set out in 2018. So what do the proposals do? What's in the revised methodology? Well, the intention, as I said, is to ensure that the accession negotiations are more credible, more predictable, more dynamic, and are guided by a stronger political steer. We're not out to radically redesign the process. As I said, it's an evolution, not a revolution. What we want to do is to learn the lessons of the past and to strengthen the process. To clearly state that we're not changing the goalposts. The goal remains accession, and that is achieved through fulfilling the Copenhagen criteria. And I, of course, now with my brilliant computer skills, have lost my wonderful speaking points. That I are again. Good. So what we're looking to do is to improve the tools that we have to push reforms forward, notably in the areas which are critical for bringing the region closer to the European Union, the rule of law and the economy. These reforms need to have a real impact on the ground. And we see this, that we have a process which is more, in many respects, more thorough than it has been in the past, and which therefore takes longer than it did in the past. You look at the average length of time between making an application for membership and becoming a member, and it's very different to what it has been in previous accessions, certainly much different to Spain, much different even to what we had with the fifth wave of enlargement. And that therefore we are acutely aware that we need to show benefits of the process before accession takes place, because we're not talking about a 5-6 year process anymore, as you in Serbia well know. And therefore we need to ensure that ongoing reforms have a real impact on the ground, that they're seen as boosting prosperity, creating jobs, improving the quality of life, and that and that the citizens of the region have a sense of freedom and purpose, and that the process is moving forward. And that we thought that, that from time to time has perhaps been a little bit lacking, and we wanted to address that as part of the revised methodology. Right? All of this, of course, will only happen if the pace of reforms is not only sustained, but is actually accelerated. Now, we want to, as I said, we want to improve the credibility of the process. And the entire accession process is built upon credibility. And that's the absolute fundamental building block. There has to be credibility that reforms are taking place. And there has to be, on the side of the acceding country and on the side of the member states, we need to be credible in terms of fulfilling the promises that we've met. So the revised methodology therefore calls upon Western Balkan leaders to deliver more credibility on the commitment to implement fundamental reforms. Walk the walk, don't talk the talk, if I can paraphrase in that way, by actually delivering on the commitments made, because we know that commitments are often made, but on delivering on those, you're going to help reassure the EU member states and citizens legitimate concerns about the progress that's being made in the region. And on the EU side, as I said, credibility means delivering on our commitments to a merit-based process. Now, to help rebuild the credibility, the focus will be on fundamental reforms being further strengthened, as this is at the heart of the transformation process. So by which I mean rule of law, functioning of democratic institutions, where there's a stronger emphasis than there was in the past, public administration reform, and economic criteria. And when I say a stronger focus on democratic institutions, we will have, as you'll know from the revised methodology, a fundamentals cluster, which will bring together rule of law, democratic institutions, public administration, and the economic criteria. They will be together in a cluster, which will be looked at in a holistic manner, because obviously there are strong interconnections between these areas, between public administration reform, between the functioning of institutions, the mainstreaming of the fight against corruption. All of these issues will be included in a package. We also, through the revised methodology, want to give a stronger political steer. There was a feeling that the process needs strong political leadership on both sides. We want to put the political nature of the process front and center again. That yes, there is a very strong technical dimension to the accession process. There always has been, there always will be, but it needs to have that overriding political will on both sides in order to ensure that we can move forward. So the revised methodology is there to ensure a top-level engagement with the candidate countries, notably through having more political intergovernmental conferences. Most of you will have luckily avoided sitting in an intergovernmental conference. They tend to be very dry, with a reading out of formal positions and nothing much more than that. The intention of the revised methodology is to make them more political, more focused, to focus on the steps that need to be taken in the coming months to ensure progress, and to look at how those steps can be achieved. So we also want to ensure in the political steer to ensure that member states are involved more strongly and to give them better opportunities to monitor and review progress, and to support and keep track of the fundamental reforms needed. Because sometimes there is a sense that member states are looking from a distance, they see some of the headlines, they don't see the detail, they don't see what's necessarily happening on the ground. Not all member states all of the time, but sometimes there's, the thing is we want to ensure a greater engagement at all levels from the member states. And we want to ensure a more dynamic process. We want to cluster chapters by policy fields to allow for a more thorough political discussion on thematic issues and to identify opportunities for early alignment and involvement into EU policies. And if I can at this point, this doesn't mean that the chapters no longer exist or the chapters are abolished or the chapters are no longer important. We are still negotiating on the basis of 35 chapters. They are still the fundamental technical element of this process, because you need to ensure you have alignment on free movement of capital, free movement of goods, on public procurement, on competition policy, if you are to be a member state. because there is, as I said, this strong technical underpinning to this entire process. At one level, it's an inherently deeply technical process. At another, it is also a deeply political process, but you have to marry the two. And one of the ways of trying to marry the two is by clustering the chapters. And our sense is that by clustering chapters, for example, having a strong economics cluster, that you can, by achieving progress there, for example, unlock earlier access to elements of the internal market, or to access to EU programs, or to or earlier access to membership of EU agencies, hypothetically, when you look at these different areas. So by looking at an area, it also enables you to focus reforms in a less piecemeal manner. If you're engaged in economic reform, it may well touch on provision of services. It may well touch on free movement of capital. So by ensuring you're working in a more holistic manner in these broad thematic areas, it should help make the progress quicker, and it should help bring, an earlier integration with all of the reforms that will entail, notably in the economic sector, for the population at large. Now, I've mentioned the fundamentals cluster, and it will have a central role in all of this. Built into the fundamentals cluster is that there was sufficient progress will be needed to achieve in this area will be needed before other clusters can be opened. And I think that's an important point. There is this central focus, and the fundamentals remain at the core. Now, I've mentioned credibility. In addition, we also need predictability for both sides. So what the revised methodology seeks to do is to more clearly define the conditions and the positive and negative consequences of progress or of a lack of progress. So on the positive side, we will have clear incentives. If key reforms are implemented, we will see, as I've mentioned, a gradual integration to EU policies and markets in advance of accession. So taking hold of some of those benefits in a way which wouldn't previously have been possible. At the same time, our member states need to be confident that corrective measures are taken where there is prolonged stagnation or backsliding. This will be done through more decisive measures, sanctioning any serious or prolonged backlog or even backsliding. Now, one important distinction to draw there, that for Serbia and Montenegro, we already have negotiating frameworks which already set, as the name suggests, the framework in which the accession negotiations take place, the rules and procedures under which that process will take place. There are elements of the revised methodology, and this is one, therefore, which will apply to new candidate countries, to Albania, North Macedonia, but not in the same way to Montenegro and Serbia, because we are not going to rewrite the negotiating frameworks. We've agreed and established the rules of the game there, and therefore, in terms of conditionality, there may well be slight differences with Albania and North Macedonia, but as already been pointed out, in fact, the fundamentals and the principles are already there, and mechanisms do exist. So we maintain the status quo, or we even advance on it for those who are coming along afterwards. Now, that's what the revised methodology consisted of. Where are we currently? I think there are three strands to the approach that need to be looked at. First of all, there's the work on the methodology itself. Secondly, there's progress in the accession negotiations with Albania and North Macedonia. And thirdly, there were the economic and investment plan, which was the third wing of the package that was provided, that was set out at the time that the revised methodology was adopted. On the methodology, the first thing to say is, of course, that the accession is an intergovernmental conference. And whilst we as the Commission can make proposals, it is very much for the member states to decide, and they have their own right of initiative as well in this respect. So we as the Commission have proposed a revised methodology. It's up to the member states to decide what they like about that, what they don't like about that, what they wish to tweak and amend. So we've been looking for decisions in two areas. On the one hand, the negotiating framework for Albania and North Macedonia, and on the other, how we apply the methodology to Montenegro and Serbia, now that both Serbia and Montenegro have agreed that they wish to have the revised methodology applied to them. Now, on Albania and North Macedonia, as you know, the technical preparations of the negotiating framework were completed. These are now with the Council, and it is for the Council to make the final decision. And I won't say anything more about that here. You're welcome to ask me questions about that later. I will try and answer to the extent to which I can. For Serbia and Montenegro, the Commission has again prepared proposals for the member states to consider as to how to apply the methodology within the existing negotiating frameworks. So that's a clear difference with Albania and North Macedonia. We already have a negotiating framework structure. We have to work within that. There's also a further difference on the ground, which is that Montenegro has opened all of the chapters while Serbia has not. So therefore we need to find individual approaches that reflect that for Montenegro and for Serbia. And looking at the third pillar on the economic and investment plan, this was launched, approved Zagreb, and the work is now underway on implementing it within the context of IPA 3, because the plan is focuses on economic development, on boosting not just economies, but in boosting prospects for citizens of the region, but it is funded out of IPA 3 funding, and therefore falls within the overall framework of IPA 3 and all of that entails. So what do we have to do next? And this, first of all, it's important to say that we need to restore, the overriding objective here was to restore momentum to the accession process and help both sides reach our common objective, which is accession. In the short term, clearly, we need to carry on working to open accession negotiations with Albania and North Macedonia. If you're talking about a credible, predictable process, then this really has to happen. Council are working on it. We hope we get there very soon. We then need to apply this methodology, which we've sketched out at a number of levels, but which it's true, there are still some technical details that need to come. So we have our communication, we have our negotiating frameworks, we have our proposals for Serbia and Montenegro, but that within that there will still be some details that we need to work out exactly how clusters are going to function. Such details such as what is the difference between a roadmap, which is what the revised methodology talks about, and an action plan, which is what we had for Serbia and Montenegro in chapters 23 and chapter 24. We haven't gone through this level of detail yet, and that's something that's still to come. But the idea is to get all of this out of the way during the course of this year, so we can start, properly negotiating, and we can start boosting the accession process with Montenegro and Serbia. And I will stop there. Hopefully, I've not taken up any of anybody else's time, and there's plenty of time for questions at the end.
Thank you, Mr. Hudson. And let me reassure you, as a former civil servant, you are considerably less boring than the average example of that species. So
don't tell anyone that I failed.
Okay, thank you very much. Now I'm going to give the floor to Professor Iris Goldner-Lang, who comes from the Faculty of Law, Zagreb Faculty of Law, and from the department which until now has given 2 judges of the Court of Justice of the European Union and hopefully 1 advocate general, if I'm not mistaken. So Iris, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Uroš. So I would first like to thank the Belgrade Institute of European Studies, and in particular, Dr. Uroš ČEMALOVIĆ for the invitation to this timely conference. And just like you, I'm really sorry we cannot meet in person in Belgrade. The advantage of living in the Zoom world is that we are meeting online, so it's better than nothing, I would say. Now, when Uroš invited me to the conference, I asked him what he would like me to talk about. And he was very flexible, telling me that any issue that is of relevance within the framework of the topic of the conference, such as the Zagreb Declaration, would fit well. And having thought about it, I decided to sum up both my practical experience gained during accession negotiations with the Central and Eastern European countries and with Croatia, and my research findings acquired while I was writing a book on the rights of mobile workers from association to accession and other papers on this topic. And I came up with 4 points that I would like to make. These points will rely on the 4 principles contained within the new enlargement methodology, which Mr. Hudson has already talked about. So credibility, predictability, dynamism, and stronger political steer, plus reversibility as the 5th principle. However, I will, to a certain degree, alter the meaning of these principles to support the points that I want to make. So I will start with the principle of predictability. At the time of Croatian accession negotiations, I was a member of 3 working groups representing Croatia in the negotiations on free movement of workers, on services and establishment, and on institutions. In the area of free movement of workers, we were hoping that we could avoid the 7-year transitional period that would enable the old member states to retain national restrictions for Croatian nationals who would like to access their labor markets. And we drafted what we thought was a very detailed note when meeting with the Commission representatives in Brussels, providing a number of legal and practical reasons why transitional periods should not be applied to Croatia, such as the fact that unlike Central and Eastern European countries, Croatia was exceeding on its own, that Croatia is a very small country with a small number of working age population, and that consequently it is not a threat to the member states' labor markets, and so on. However, as you know, Croatia was in the end subject to a transitional period on free movement of workers, just like Spain and Portugal were in the 1980s, and just like all Central and Eastern European countries were in 2004 and 2007. So obviously, changing the practice of imposing transitional periods would create an unwanted precedent for future enlargements, like the ones we are currently into, and member states did not want to risk it. So consequently, the principle of predictability in the new enlargement methodology is not just about setting clear benchmarks and conditions that have to be fulfilled by the candidate country, but also about learning from previous enlargement practices and knowing the unwritten rules that will for sure be applied in future enlargements. The Commission has gathered enormous experience in the course of previous enlargements, and it will, of course, use this institutional memory for future practices. I remember being told by a Commission official working on accession negotiations with Central and Eastern European countries in 2002 that the positive side of the fact that Croatia had not yet at that time applied for EU membership was that it gave the Commission more time to acquire the knowledge and experience based on negotiations with Central and Eastern European countries and apply it when negotiating with Croatia. And the same can be said about the negotiations with the Western Balkans countries, which are following the same pattern like the previous negotiations and adding novelties, which are the result of the particularities of the Western Balkans countries and the present moment of the European integration. Second, the principle of credibility. Prior to getting employed at the University of Zagreb as a very young lawyer, I did a traineeship at the European Commission in DG Sanko, which was at that time responsible for EU policies on health, food safety, and consumer protection. And I was working in the unit in charge of horizontal legal and policy issues including enlargement issues in DG Sanco. And I was there at the time of accession negotiations with Central and Eastern European countries, which was an amazing experience as I learned a lot and had the privilege to sit at many meetings at the Commission and the Council Enlargement Working Group. I remember that the Commission was regularly sending experts on field missions to candidate countries to establish the level of their compliance with the acquis, not only on paper, but even more importantly, in practice. So credibility, which Mr. Hudson has already addressed, and mutual trust were crucial in accession negotiations with Central and Eastern European countries and with Croatia. And they will, I'm sure, be crucial in all future accession negotiations. So the Commission and the member states will allow the negotiations to proceed and to get finalized only provided they trust the counterparts sitting on the opposite side of the negotiating table. Thirdly, I would like to look at dynamism as one of the 4 principles of the enlargement methodology, jointly with reversibility as the 5th principle. Having negotiating chapters organized in clusters, which have to be opened and closed in a specific order, is a kind of a novelty of the new enlargement methodology. However, it is not that surprising, in my opinion. So previous accession negotiations showed that it makes sense to combine certain chapters and not to leave the most difficult chapters for the end. As regards reversibility, in previous negotiations, it was also possible, at least in theory, to reopen a chapter that was previously closed. And the rule that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed was a well-known principle. Chapter 23 on judiciary and on fundamental rights and chapter 24 on justice, freedom, and security were the most demanding chapters for Croatia. So it is not surprising that they form the fundamentals that have to be opened first and closed last, based on the new enlargement methodology. Additionally, it is not surprising that so much emphasis is placed on the rule of law and fundamental rights, considering the developments in Hungary and Poland and the member states' concern over this. At the time of Central and Eastern European countries' accession to the EU, and at the time of Croatian accession to the EU as well, the EU enlargement policy used to be perceived as an irreversible process of legal, of political, and of societal harmonization of the candidate country with the EU norms, and even more importantly, with the EU values. However, the developments in Hungary and Poland open up the question of the efficacy and the irreversibility of the accomplished pre-accession reforms. So therefore, I would say that it is no wonder that the EU lays so much emphasis on the rule of law and fundamental rights in the new accession negotiations. And fourthly, and finally, I would like to juxtapose the principle of a stronger political steer in the new enlargement methodology, which necessitates a closer dialogue between the EU and the candidate country, with point 16 of the Zagreb Declaration, which emphasizes the importance of cooperation in migration issues, including combating of migrant smuggling and the EU's support of reception capacities in the Western Balkans. I expect that the progress of accession negotiations with the Western Balkans countries will, among other factors, depend on their successful cooperation with member states in restraining migration influxes and preventing the reoccurrence of the 2015-2016 Western Balkans route. So from this perspective, I would say that EU migration policy is already in the pre-accession period reflected on what is going on in the Western Balkans states. Thank you very much.
Dear Iris, thank you for your presentation and thanks for respecting the time. So we are really very on the schedule. Now I would like to give floor to our dear colleague from the Polish Academy of Sciences, Institute of Political Studies, Mr. Paweł OLSZEWSKI, who is also a dean of a reputed faculty within one well-known Polish university. So, Mr. OLSZEWSKI, the floor is yours. Paweł, are you there?
Oh yeah, I am there. I started to talk. Unfortunately, I didn't unmute myself. Sorry. So once more, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for organizing this conference. Uroš, thank you very much for all the best and wish all the best. So I would like to emphasize, I think, few general aspects of the new methodology, which, in my opinion, especially are empowering the process of integration. Also, I think from the point of view of the person who lives in a country which was on the same path years ago. First of all, what I see in the new methodology is, of course, this main topic as a clear conditions and 6 clusters. This is a very important thing, in my opinion, because first of all, clear conditions and 6 clusters means that it is not only clear for the negotiators, but it is also clear for politicians and for citizens. Because as you all know, sometimes even politicians or especially citizens, they don't understand all these matters, what we are talking about, what's going about this integration process, why it takes so long, why we discuss every detail, etc. So this clear conditions are the most one of the most important aspects here. Another thing is conditionality with sanctioning lack of progress. Conditionality, which is also or also can be called very clear rule. So if you do something, you will receive something. And this also shows also to politicians and to citizens that every part has to be fulfilled. That if this is not fulfilled, you cannot go further, you cannot move further. So what I see here is this new methodology is just quite simple, let's say. Quite simple in understanding how this road to the EU is constructed and how we should look onto this road. I remember the referendum in Poland before entering the EU and all the discussions which showed that many people totally didn't understand what everything is going about. Another thing is strengthening regional cooperation. This is very important because this is, I think, one of the bases of being in the EU, the ability and will to cooperate. Because if there is no ability and there is no will to cooperate, it's impossible to act, to be, and to fulfill all the requirements which European Union brings with itself. Also, this aspect of cooperation and all these written points about strengthening cooperation in the new methodology, for me, is quite clearly connected with communication aspects. And it is also in the methodology, communication. So if we have to cooperate, we have to communicate together. And I think that the last point, which is quite important in new methodology and which comes out of new methodology, is functional cooperation. Because as I see it and as I understand it, countries willing to join the EU and EU itself, they will be communicating with each other, they will be cooperating, and this cooperation will be functional. So each point will be precisely that according to functional cooperation, which I think is the most important, because we are talking about points which we are interested in, points which are very important to do. So in general, as I look into new methodology, it seems to me that it would be easier even for Poland maybe years ago to join the EU, as we as a citizens and many politicians would be able to more clearly understood the process of integration according to these clear conditions, according to the need of communication, and according to functional cooperation, which arises from the whole new methodology. Maybe Mr. David Hudson would correct me if I am wrong, but nevertheless, I see it like this. Thank you very much.
Okay. Mr. OLSZEWSKI, thank you for a very brief but rich presentation. Now we have a speaker coming from Albania, from the Institute for Change and Leadership in Albania, Mr. Bernaj ZENELI, who will give us his perspective from the angle of the political sciences, but also history, given the fact that he's also expert in this field. Mr. ZENELI, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Uroš. I'm just trying to see if I can share the screen. Okay, hold on 1 second.
We see it.
Okay. Again, thank you for the invitation. Because I look at things more from a very empirical perspective, I would say, it was really a challenge, and I welcomed it to come into discussions about things that affect us as Albanians regularly, but also to connect it to what I've been doing for the last 20 or more years in the venue of trying to develop institutions, mainly in the sphere of education, that could support a new system that in which the countries of the region entered from the early 90s. And I would say, unfortunately, for Albania, the process of transition to a more stable democratic government has gone for the last 30 years. And in the same path or in the same venue, it seems to be the situation with this process of accession to the EU. What I did for this intervention was look a little bit at the language which was used in the new methodology. My background is as a linguist, and then I turned into a political scientist and tried to develop political science as a subject both in Albania and then later in Kosovo. And what I see as in terms of a political scientist that focuses in or that focused in in comparative politics is that this process is a halting process, in the sense that Europe wants to engage and shows signs, but then you also have these drawbacks in the process. And I would say in many cases, this is because of us and not because of Europe. And it seems like that in this halting process, which has been long, which has been stressful, with fatigue, there is a lot of politicization, I would say. You can see that the terms that have been used, it was Balkans, then became Southeast Europe, now it's Western Balkans. Countries have changed names as well in this process. And it is a process, it is there, it has its own DG that deals with it. But from an empirical perspective or the perspective of someone who lives in a country that is going through the process, you don't see a finalization. If I am to critique the new approach, I think also based on the paper that Uroš had written, which was really quite good, I would say that the process needs more harmonization. And what I mean by that is not just the criteria or the coupling or the decoupling or connecting this with that, but it's more of a process in which what happens in the countries is harmonized with what happens in EU. The other thing that I see as important to get rid of is this drama in the process. I mean, imagine the new methodology was approved in the middle of a pandemic, and I believe that there were more important issues to deal with than this new methodology. But you also see that whenever there are elections in the major countries in the EU, there is more drama to this process, and the current Prime Minister of Albania uses this very effectively to show that it's not his fault that the process is not moving forward, but it is these domestic issues that the EU countries have on their own. And furthermore, you do not see this harmonization when you move from an EU government to another one, and this process that changes every time that there are new leaders or new elements added seems to make it again a situation in which you keep waiting for Godot, but he never shows up. One other thing that I would like to draw attention is the fact that you have to please 3 different groups in this process. And you have to deal with 3 different situations. One is the EU of Brussels and its intertwined bureaucracy. So the people that work in the European Commissions, in the DGs, especially the DG for enlargement, and how they approach it, and what are their concerns, etc., etc. Then we have a EU which is comprised of the member countries, and you have to please and also deal with them. Can I be excused for 1 second, please? Because something is not right with my video.
Yes, of course.
Sorry.
Now we see 3-tiered context slide. If this is the one you wanted to share with us.
Yep, this is it. Again, I'm sorry for the interruption. And then the third one is the EU of the political party families. So depending what government is in place in either Albania and Macedonia is also related very much on the political party families that are represented in the European Parliament. So when I talk about harmonization, I don't see that in these three-tiered context of EU enlargement that that we deal with. Okay. Furthermore, enlargement is a process that is also dependent on capital cities. And especially in the last decade, the role of Berlin has increased. They have started also what is called the Berlin process. And they are influencing, catalyzing, and capitalizing in the region through the EU enlargement. We have a very interesting situation with Washington, DC, which in a way has given way to EU enlargement and tries, in my opinion, to move out of the region and its entanglements, I would say. We have then Moscow, which is competing and challenging the role of EU and its tediously long processes. And the last but not the least, I would say, it's the role of Beijing, which is controlling in the region and the EU itself through large investments. What is or what has become visible in terms of this process of enlargement is that it's going on at a time or vis-a-vis a process of nation-state reduction. And what I mean by that is mainly the issue of national sovereignty. In Albania, we around 2013-14, we started a process that was called a process of legal reform, supported by both EU and the United States, through which the whole legal system in Albania was supposed to be revamped, majorly through a vetting process for the lawyers, for the judges and the prosecutors. One of the results of that process has been that for the last 3 years, Albania has not had a functioning functioning legal system. The constitutional court was not functioning, the high court was not functioning, because many of their members lost their positions because the vetting process found them not right to be part of the legal system. Another interesting thing that I sort of took note while reading more about this issue is that the reform in Albania has constitutionalized the role of the EU Director of the Western Balkans of the European Commission as chair of the International Monitoring Operation. And this wording is within the current Albanian constitution. So what is the role of I would say simple EU bureaucrat within the constitution of a country? To me, it raises a lot of questions. And the third issue in terms of Albania is the issue with the sea border with Greece, where part of the concessions that Albania has to make in order to ensure support of Greece is to, allow Greece more concessions when it comes to the issue of the sea border. So in this process, we see that enlargement has had a cost in a country like Albania. To me, as a person that is, I would say, stuck in the 90s in terms of believing in democracy and democratization and seeing the development through the importance that democracy and democratizing has, it seems to me that this process of enlargement and the process of trying to become more European has not reflected in the increase of democracy. I mean, I simply looked at two different indexes. One is the EU Democracy Index, and you can see that Albania is considered a flawed democracy, while North Macedonia is a hybrid regime. On the other hand, Serbia is considered a flawed democracy, and Montenegro is a hybrid regime. And this is through the Economic Intelligence Unit. And then the Freedom House Index, you can also see that they are very close in their total scores. Albania 66, Montenegro 63, North Macedonia 66, and Serbia 64. So this, if you notice, these countries in terms of the Freedom House Index are partly free. So, so this process of enlargement, of becoming European, in my opinion, has not made us more democratic. And then there is this issue of stability, which has been discussed and talked about in our region, and as seen as what enlargement is doing is replacing democratization with this concept of stability. So the issue of having a stable region in the Western Balkans has become more important than having it a democratic region. And it seems that these conditions or these this new methodology moves towards that. So there are certain conditions to be fulfilled before becoming democratic. One other interesting development in this concept, in this area of stability, is this idea of the mini Schengen, through which the countries of the region would create opportunities for themselves to have a trade-free zone and to increase cooperation. I would say with a hope that the whole region can be accepted one day or enter the process of enlargement in a more effective way. But again, I see this issue of stability gaining more prominence and more importance vis-a-vis the issue of being democratic. And what makes it even more challenging for the region is this lure that I consider in Albania with Turkey, but in the other countries with China and Russia, and sort of like a competitive approach. And we see vaccines, we see investments, we see political support from these three countries in the region. I mean, for example, in Albania, Turkey, in a meeting the Prime Minister of Albania had with the President of Turkey, decided to support Albania with a new hospital, which he said he was going to build in less than 3 months. And the day of the inauguration of the new hospital will be very close to the upcoming elections, which are in April, at the end of April. So this this situation of the enlargement vis-a-vis these Eastern lures, it seems to me that it gives the local elites an opportunity to, in a way, challenge the enlargement process. Have they used it effectively? Unfortunately, I cannot say so, because I've not had the opportunity to see closely and in depth from a scientific perspective how these two competing things are going on. Uroš, tell me if I'm losing my time, or
you have another 3 to 5 minutes.
Good.
We are sticking to the plan.
Okay. And this brings me to the way enlargement is used in the domestic politics. people in a country like Albania know very well who are the people that lead the enlargement process. Ambassadors have become very important, and what I see as a concern is that although there is a backsliding based also on the indexes that I showed with you, and especially in terms of the clampdown on the media that is critical towards governments, and we also see this rise of illiberal democracy, the way criticism comes through the EU system is a very petty one, because, as I said, enlargement and stability are more important than this, making the process more democratic. I also see the process as being a very personalized one. You have, you can tell that who are the people that are favored in the EU, which are the political forces that are favored, and this makes, again, the process of EU accession very, very central for local politics. And this is something that, if I am to take a sort of challenge or look at it as something to think about in the future, is this, that because this process has become so central, it can be further built on it. To conclude, it seems to me that the more conditionalized the enlargement process, the further away from Europe as values the region is going. And I can support this with data on Albania. I've not seen the data on the other countries as much as I would like to. There is an increasing influence of corruption, monopoly-based economy, money laundering, drug trafficking, resulting in a withering rule of law situation, which, in my opinion, tells that this legal reform, is not worked as much as we wanted it to work. There is an increasing influence of these radical peripheral ideas, including those of radical Islam in the region. And this situation makes people, as Professor Goldner-Lang mentioned, to leave the region, making migration a very thorny issue. And it seems to me that we have less influence of Europe as a united front and more influence from specific countries that allows governments like the one in Albania to think about specific countries like friends or non-friends. So if there are countries that are critical about the situation and what's going on in Albania, they are considered non-friends. But if there are countries that support the current government, bring in vaccines, etc., they are the friends of Albania, which, creating this kind of divisions, I don't find it, I'm not thinking of diplomatic, but I don't find it effective in terms of, especially when you are trying to become a member of this group or this club. Again, the region, and Albania included, continuously commits to the process of enlargement. But in order for it to be effective, I think, and in discussions in the country, especially when we do trainings, etc., it seems that the process needs to be less about politics, but more with political will in it, and in a process which is really oriented towards enlargement. I think we also have an issue with the way we evaluate enlargement, and because I strongly believe in good governance and in accountability, I think that a democratization of the process, making it more transparent, and making both parties more accountable would really create a better option for the process of enlargement in terms of reselling it both within the EU and within the Western Balkans. What I'm particularly worried about is that when you look at this new methodology, and also when you look at the language of the progress reports that are written, we are falling into the Orwellian trap of the politics of the English language, where he said that we can use the language any way we want to describe things that we see fit, but not the reality. And this is, again, the issue with the language of enlargement, the language of progress reports, and the language of bureaucracy. We have moved away from telling what is really the truth, and we try to, hide things by saying, as it is often the case in the reports, that there is progress done, but then there are listed like 10 or 15 problems with the particular issue. Then how is this progress? But anyway, I'll stop here. Thanks again to all of you, and open for questions when the time comes.
Dear Bernard, thank you a lot. First, for a very straightforward, open presentation, extremely interesting and visually very rich. Your PowerPoint was just great, and everything you said, I'm sure will raise many, many questions. Now I have a pleasure of giving the floor to my colleague Vladimir RISTANOVIĆ, who will speak about one aspect that we partially neglected until now, and this famous aspect is money, economics of enlargement. Vladimir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Uroš. First of all, I want to thank you for such kind of opportunity to be here today. Also, I want to thank you, all of you here who work with the Institute of European Studies and with Hans-Seidel Foundation, and who support of them. And very much appreciate you, Uroš, your efforts to organize such kind of online conference. I was talking with my friends before the meeting, and they were all trying to tell me that I was a pessimist, advising me not to be pessimist during the meeting. But what I'd like to do is try to convince you that I'm not such pessimist. When I look down at down here to the title of the meeting, EU and the Western Balkans after the adoption of the new enlargement methodology, I think I know what that means. Still, I see a considerable rays of hope, but I'll be a little critical, but I'll try to share with you the facts based on official data. Maybe some of them will deviate from the previous statements, but we will see. Let me start with a very basic point, but it is often forgotten. If I ask myself what is mankind's greatest achievement ever, I submitted to you mankind's greatest achievement is Western Europe, both old Europe with famous historical people, musicians, architecture, philosophy, artists, and also modern Europe today. Are the people satisfied with EU life, how they live? A big part of this achievement relate to Eurozone, Brussels administration in particular. So I'm very pessimistic about Eurozone, but not about Europe. The level of life satisfaction in EU is decreasing last years. According to Eurostat data, people with a lower income are more satisfied with EU. Wealthy people are not so satisfied because their standard of living was declining last years. Also, when you look at Eurostat data, you can see that the growing EU member states has been insufficient in the last 20 years, measured in the GDP per capita US dollars, constant US dollars. Also, the new members are catching up with the developed countries into European Union. It's good. Spain is being overtaken by new EU members measured by GDP per capita in purchasing power parity. For example, we have the Czech Republic overtaken Spain. But this is not to be a problem if the Spain achieved the faster growth. But Spain is declining. Actually, compared to 2008, when Spain was above EU average, with 2019, we have a completely we have a different situation. Actually, Spain is below the EU average. It's similar situation with Italy. In last 20 years, Italy has achieved growth of economy for 6.3%. Greece just 2.3. It's statistical error. Denmark 14.1. Germany is an average of Eurozone 27.3%. But we are talking about 20 years long period, and that is the problem. There are a number of problems in European Union. In my opinion, there are a lot of disagreement, selective rules, contradictory information, etc. A number of key issues remain unresolved. Every topic becomes a problem because the problems are solved by a routine compromises instead of a consensus. I will give you 3 examples, just 3. For example, first one, EU enlargement policy. French and Netherlands blocked the negotiation in December 2019. Adoption of the EU budget a couple of weeks ago, months. Hungary and Poland blocked adoption. Vaccination today. The intention to unite European countries is completely clear, but process of unification itself is difficult, unattainable. Nations are united, they have a common currency, single market, and it's okay, but EU is failing and it doesn't work properly with many different languages, a long historical difference, many cultural, traditional habits, different tax policy, even separate election in every country. You cannot have a full European integration. I mean integration at full capacity. Overall, trust among member states has been lost. There are 3 different solutions for solving this problem, in my opinion. I like some more than others. To have more trust is one solution, and I would be happy with that solution. A long-term possession requires greater confidence within European Union. That second that second solution, and I favor that also. Solution number 3, I do not favor, but I think it's useful for putting the problem into perspective, is to block ambiguous individual messages. Let me explain just last one. A few weeks ago, in the Deutsche Welle, you can find the text about EU enlargement, had published in the Frankfurt Allgemeine Zeitung in 2020. The text about close the door of the European Union after July 2013, when Croatia became a last new member country. Let me give you another official example. Analyzing the EU budget for the period 2021-27, I found out there is no money for enlargement, even any cent. Only a few million of euros for institutional capacities. Nothing else. What that means, what it means for Balkans. Waiting for 2030 or 2035, I don't know. With the new promises, huge expectation, pure hope. Even if Brussels' intentions are sincere, both sides will lose their will sooner or later. I also mean that EU administration is burdened with the formal matters. Technocracy dominates, while the essence is neglected. And one rhetorical question as an introduction to the next pillar of my speech. If the Brussels administration failed to solve the problems within EU, how will it solve the problems in the Balkans? Maybe the next pillar of my speech, the new enlargement methodology, is the solution. Basically, in my opinion, this methodology sends a clear message. It supports all Balkan countries in several fields. Let me read that fields, mention them. To transform into a functioning market economy, to create job and entrepreneurial opportunity, to improve the business and investment climate, to promote the rule of law and to stop brain drain from the region. It is familiar with me in cases in past with Croatia, Romania, Bulgaria. Okay, let me continue. With the unique aim to enhance access to EU single market. Perfect. They also mentioned that they'll support Balkans country in accelerating the necessary convergence within European Union. Okay. But one thing is very important, and I am very happy with that. The main advantage of this methodology is that the whole process is designed for the countries with structural weaknesses. Now the question is how to overcome these weaknesses. Maybe some special work, some special network. Also, I can accept the next point. The session process will become more dynamic, okay? By clustering the negotiating chapters. I understand the purpose, but I'm afraid of the degree of synchronization of all economic policy measures that are concentrated in one clusters or between clusters. Lack of synchronization will cause cluster result to fail. For example, it is difficult to achieve a synchronization of monetary and fiscal policy or social and income policy with, for example, agricultural policy. I will give you an example. Fiscal measure go through the parliament, which is not the case with the monetary measure. The former needs time, parliamentary consensus, while the latter comes from independent state institution. So only efficient and flexible institutional measures and instruments can be synchronized, and I'm sure that it doesn't exist in any country, in any Balkan country. The main reason why I can't support strict approach is in the following. This approach is institutionalized, supranational, and emphasizes on control and reward. From one hand, rewarding the reforms with more funding. From the other hand, sanction lack of progress by putting the negotiation in a certain negotiation on hold in a certain area, or overall suspension. And one more thing, some elements of this approach are encouraging, but remain imprecise, in my opinion, often inapplicable, and the subject of potential divergent interpretation. That is, in my opinion, the main disadvantage. It is obvious that interpretations of the result achieved in Balkans will differ among EU members. The greater these differences, the greater the pressure of political consensus. And maybe an earlier mentioned cooperation. I expect that the member states will simply agree on formal issues that are precisely defined, and it's correct. But the essential issue or issues of the Balkan countries will delay EU in membership. I'm a bit skeptical because due to the urgency of opening the clusters, certain measures will not be, fully implemented. Brussels' expectation on this issue are too ambitious, in my opinion. In other words, the question of institutions, law, competitiveness in economy, measure, instruments, tools are not enough to set criteria through the clusters or package. The accession reflects the active social choice of candidates to achieve and respect the highest European standards and values. So it seems to me that the economic space will be turned into a single economic Balkan area without considering economic structure of each Balkan states. We know what's happened with CEFTA agreement. Mini Schengen supports this methodology. All that means that Balkan will produce for the EU what will be defined somewhere else, maybe in Brussels. And maybe, and the third pillar for this for this time, in my opinion, maybe the more important, is manners. I will start with Serbia because I think that the essential problems comes from Serbia. The problem is that the number of people who expect that joining EU will solve all Serbian problems is increasing, dramatically increasing. I do not agree with that. I think that we have to work harder ourselves, regardless of whether we are paving the path to the European Union or not. In the Balkans, dominate resources and labor-intensified products, over the 50% of the total trade. This is not good in the modern and technologically advancement of the EU market. Intra-industrial trade is growing in Serbia. It is good, but this is insufficient because it dominates the horizontal over the vertical industrial trade, which is on relation of consumers' preferences, prices, as well as models, types. Experience within European Union countries show a more efficient allocation of production was achieved by specialization within certain industrial or other branches in the production of the component parts. Such intra-branches specialization in production and trade makes up about 2/3 of the today merchandise trade within European Union. The advantage is that the trade of these type of products, medium and highly technological intensified products, bring about the growth of the economy in the medium, and I can say in a long term. The benefits would be even greater if the country will be able to produce technologically higher level, which provide a greater volume of intra-industrial trade, a comparative advantage, and reduce the cost of adoption to the current EU trade structure. Personally, I think that the process of joining EU should be continued. And while we are waiting for the EU membership, we should work on improving our own capacities. It means improve education, knowledge, strength, skills, of course, technology, innovation, invention, institution, social rights, everything. This approach will enable Serbia to have a lower cost than benefits in EU accession process. And one more thing, one more information, which is very important for Serbian industry. A few days ago, a high-tech company was opened in the Novi Sad, which will produce high-tech products. That's a good way. I believe that this strategy won't be abandoned. It was the case 2014. And I hope that Serbia will increase the share of such products in the total trade. And let me sum up with 3 solutions for 3 mentioned pillars. The first one could be the circle of trust within European Union and between the European Union and the candidate countries. The second could be structural approach, and the third one could be improving the own capacity. That's it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Vladimir, thanks a lot. Especially thanks for those very concrete propositions at the end of your presentation. And now, ladies and gentlemen, surprisingly, we are almost following the schedule. We are something like 7-8 minutes late, so basically it's perfect. Now I will give the floor to myself. So I'm renouncing as my position of moderator, and now I will briefly present you what I intended to say today. Okay, so let's first try to share my presentation. Do you see it? Is it okay? Good. So I'll try to take a legal approach. And I will try to show you that, according to me, the entire, not new, but revised methodology represents basically one potential step forward and two significant steps back. So this is the plan of my presentation. First, what exactly means the Western Balkans? I know that this issue is basically resolved, but I find it interesting because establishing the fact to which countries this revised methodology should apply will also help us answer the question, what are their common advantages and especially disadvantages and weaknesses and difficulties. Then I will speak about that famous one step forward, a potentially new impulse for the enlargement, then about the 2 steps back, and like my colleague Vladimir, at the end, I will try to give you some ideas of the future. So Iris is luckily with us. I see her. Thanks for that. Iris, Croatia is the main issue when we speak about the notion of the Western Balkans. Croatia belonged to the Western Balkans from the moment of the adoption of the Thessaloniki Declaration, which included that country. But from now on, that issue lost any kind of legal and political relevance because Croatia is the member state from the 1st of July 2013. But let's note that this country belongs to the Western Balkans in many ways. I've put you an interesting book about it, edited by Sabine Rutar, published in Berlin in 2014, entitled, as you can see, Beyond the Balkans, Towards an Inclusive History of Southeastern Europe. So, Bernard, I hope you're here. Western Balkans basically means ex-Yugoslavia minus Slovenia / and Croatia plus Albania. And here, just to steal the star from my colleague Vladimir, I've put a graph representing the growth of GDP per capita in steady dollar from 1870 to 2010. Of course, this is not only formerly Yugoslav, the country of Kingdom of Yugoslavia and Socialist Republic of Yugoslavia, but all together, all the countries of the nowadays Western Balkans minus Albania, and the way their GDP was growing in the last century and a half. And you see basically that the prosperity started in late 50s and early 60s. Ex-Yugoslavia, unlike Poland, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, had a relatively liberal political and legal system and was allowing certain forms of individual economic rights. This is very important because I will mention it further on in my presentation. Legal system of all those countries, I'm not sure for Albania, is basically not a problem, not a major problem in the process of the EU integration. It's the very application of that legal system and the norms that it includes. So the real tension started in the late 80s, as you know. So the reality we have now in the countries of the Western Balkans are much more the consequences of what we had after the end of 80s and the 90s, then it is the issue of any kind of structural, normative, legal problems within those countries. So new, or let's say revised enlargement methodology could be one significant step forward. Why? As you all know, after 2013 and accession of Croatia, the EU enlargement is basically in a standstill. Montenegro opened 32 chapters and is a candidate country, has been a candidate country for already a decade. Serbia, more than 7 years after the first intergovernmental conference, opened only 1/2 of the negotiating chapters. North Macedonia is a candidate country for 15 years. Albania had one negative and one very highly conditional positive opinion, and then was finally awarded candidate status in 2014. Everything that has happened with the accession of North Macedonia and Albania in the last 2 years is a terrible shame for the European Union. I cannot use other words, but a terrible shame, especially for pro-European political forces within these countries. New conclusions adopted by the Council on 25th of March this year finally decided to open the accession negotiations with North Macedonia and Albania. As Mr. Hudson mentioned, the stronger steering of the process and famous enhanced credibility can be those potentially positive elements of the revised enlargement methodology. And I see two, legally speaking, important aspects. First, the clustering of negotiating chapters, and then enhanced predictability for both sides that includes also negative conditionality. Why? Well, clustering avoids overlapping and saves time. Of course, it's insignificant economies of time and resources, but also can help to give the better image of the enlargement process in the eye of the citizens of both member states and candidate countries. And as far as I'm concerned, I could stop here with positive aspects of the revised enlargement methodology. Of course, merit-based accession process, all this is interesting, but very empty political verbiage. Negative conditionality, on the other hand, is and should be a counterpart of clearer and better defined positive conditionality. Vladimir told you a lot about the system of reward and punishment. It can be seen in that way, but it can also be seen as a way to present the reality that you progress faster when your reforms allow you to do so. But on the other hand, you either stop progressing or you start regressing if this is not the case. Now, those 2 steps back. When you read the revised enlargement methodology, it's so full with excessively prescriptive, imprecise, and proclamatory formulations that it almost gives a nausea. The word credible or credibility is mentioned 12 times. The accession process should be reinvigorated, and the support of the European perspective of West Balkan countries is unequivocal. And another mention of accession perspective, and this is the key incentive and driver. So empty political verbiage, very often devoid of any concrete substance. The noun commitment is mentioned 7 times. The leaders of the Western Balkans country should deliver more credibly. Both sides should show more leadership. But practically not a word about how to implement all those beautiful intentions. What strikes me the most is the fact that there are practically no substantial propositions on how to involve the citizens in the process of both member states and candidate countries. It's not only up to the candidate countries, because we also have the public in the member states. Mr. FIESINGER can tell us a lot, and also our Polish friends, about the internal debate in both Germany and Poland and in France about future member states. Of course, this debate is now faded out a bit because of the COVID crisis, but it's going to take place the very day when the membership of those countries potentially one day maybe becomes closer. And as I see it, probably the biggest problem is that we still have the principle of unanimity. So all the positive aspects of clustering that can save time and energy can be totally, entirely counterbalanced by one divergent opinion of a single member state. Let's take the example of Bulgaria. I'm sure some of you followed all the statements of the Bulgarian Minister of Foreign Affairs. What Bulgaria said about the potential progress of the North Macedonia gives us a very bad perspective, a very gloomy perspective about the future of the entire process, because there is still unanimity, formally speaking. Vladimir mentioned all the problems with adoption of the new EU budget. Hungary and Poland made a strong coalition of 2 countries, and they managed to have what they basically wanted. Now in German media, you have a very serious debate about whether Chancellor Merkel in some way accepted that quite a let's say politically compromised position of Hungary and Poland, and accepted to be blackmailed, and changed important part, influenced also other member states to substantially change some elements of the budget. So I see that as a big problem, that one country can stop the entire process. And now, this is not my idea, so I quoted someone. I quoted 2 distinguished young German researchers, Solveig Richter and Natascha Wunsch, who wrote an amazing article about the enlargement. Money, Power, Glory, the linkages between EU conditionality and state capture in the Western Balkans. And those 2 ladies said, basically, that top-down conditionality weakened political competition within the country and helped to have what we have in some of our candidate countries, the status we call the state capture, the reality we call state capture, captured state. So all these are potential problems. Now, I'm not going to be pessimistic for the conclusion. I think that those positive elements of the new revised methodology of the enlargement can contribute if properly used by the political elites in the member states, especially in two key member states. Even though there is no key member state, dear Iris, Croatia is also a key member state. But in terms of political weight, it's France and Germany, and both of them have significant parliamentary and presidential elections for France in 2022. And finally, the problem, the key issue I see here is that those internal difficulties of all our Western Balkans countries, so beautifully presented by Mr. ZENELI, would lead to very high adjustment costs. Whenever I mention adjustment costs to my colleagues, they tell me, oh yeah, this is the famous issue of environment. But don't think only about the money. Yes, for Serbia only 9 billion euros will be needed as investment in the environment and environment protection to reach the EU standards in that field. 9 billion over next 15 years. But this is something Serbia should do regardless the process of EU integration. But when I mention high adjustment costs, they're mainly political and structural. If you ask me now, the process of EU integration in Serbia is totally stopped. There is also, like in the EU, significant political verbiage around it, but basically nothing significant happens. And the reflect of that is the number of chapters Serbia opened last year, which is 0. And finally, COVID-19 made the entire picture even more complex because we have what I call refurbished nationalisms in the EU member states. And the citizens of the EU member states start to believe that in many ways, the response of their national sovereign state is more adapted than the supranational answer of the EU. I would be delighted to see that some supranationality gains importance in the EU again, but COVID crisis showed us that in so many aspects, this was not the case. And finally, I have a photo for you of a very beautiful piece of art, which represents a traveler. So this is how we could represent all those countries traveling. One part of them is lost. It's a very famous artist that made this, but don't be as negative because the photo is beautiful and the guy seems to be still walking in his direction. Okay, so thank you very much. Now I renounce my role of speaker and I open the discussion. I will kindly ask you to choose either the way of written way to address to all of us, or if you really want your voice to be heard in both meanings of this word, to speak to us, because we are not in two rooms. If I'm not wrong, we are all in one room, so we can all hear each other. So please feel free to ask questions. Thank you.
Uroše, ima pitanja na chatu već.
Dobro, evo sad ćemo pogledati. Ja ih za sada ne vidim. Aha, evo su. Okay, questions. So let's ask the first question from Gordana Gasmi to Dr. ZENELI. It was stated recently by Dr. Elise Bernard from Europa Nova that the EU will not repeat the mistake of accession of Cyprus. What do you think about that thesis if it would be applied to the Western Balkans region? Best regards from Dr. Gordana Gasmi from the Institute of Comparative Law in Belgrade. Bernard, have you heard the question?
I was actually writing the response. I think, although I'm not very familiar with Elisa Bernard's views, it's referring more to the border issues and these unresolved nationalistic matters when it comes to the issue of Cyprus. And in a way, that's why I brought up the idea of the mini Schengen. In a way, Europe is trying to have the countries in the region resolve these problems, including the issue of Kosovo for Serbia, before they can do the next step, that of accession and integration. That would be my answer to that. So it's a more staggered process in order to allow the countries not to bring more problems into Europe. Thanks.
Thank you, Bernard. So Mrs. Gasmi also had another question, a very long one. Mr. Hudson, can you see it, that long question? Or you want me to read it to you because it's for you, the question?
Listen, I can see it for, yeah, I'm happy to have
quite
a
a
go.
long question.
To explain to everyone, it's a question about how individual chapters will be treated under the new cluster approach, and the impact of that will have. I mean, yes. I mean, at one level, this is incredibly technical, and we were talking earlier about about the politics of language and so on, and practical, and so let's try and break this down a little. So the question is about, for example, if the financial services chapter is already open, if it's then put inside a cluster, can it, what is the impact of it not being closed, or can it be closed before the cluster is closed? And what is the impact of it not being closed if it has to wait for the rest of the cluster to be closed? The current thinking is that yes, that you will open chapters within a cluster together. I mean, and this is where you have this discrepancy between sort of the pure revised methodology, which will apply to Albania and North Macedonia, and the situation as it will apply in Montenegro and Serbia, where you're already partway down that path. So, under the pure methodology, you will open and close clusters at the same time. So you will open a cluster, and when everything is ready to be closed, you will close the cluster. For Serbia and for Montenegro, it looks as if, for sake of convenience, we will equally group the existing open chapters, or chapters that need to be opened, inside clusters, and we will then try and move as quickly as possible to open the remaining chapters in the cluster and then close the cluster together. What it means is that the existing work is all still completely valid. Everything that has been done in terms of draft compositions, where they've been prepared, all of that remains completely valid and will not need to be rearranged. The impact will be that, yes, that there won't be provisional closure of individual chapters in the same way that you would have an IGC and you would close the chapter on financial services. Now, the practical impact of that is, let's be honest, absolutely zero, because it was a situation we would often have, that you would have a chapter which was basically closed because technical agreement had been reached. And if there wasn't an IGC for 3, 4, 5 months, the chapter wasn't closed for 3 or 4 or 5 months. And the practical difference of that was zero. The practical situation, of course, was always that it would have been possible to reopen those chapters in any case. That's still the case now. I think that's more important now than it was previously, because, of course, where you had a negotiating period that only lasted perhaps 3 years, there was very little need to adjust any of the chapters in advance of accession to changes in the acquis. And that's no longer the case. So in fact, it's theoretically possible, and it may well come to pass, that if you close a cluster and you haven't actually closed accession negotiations for another 3 or 4 years, that there may well be new acquis that you need to update to in that cluster, which is an eventuality we've not had, but which we would, well, not in exactly that way, but which we may come across now. So chapters will be provisionally closed together. The practical impact of that for an individual chapter is nothing. We hope that if we explain this properly, then those who work on those chapters will understand that the practical impact of that is nothing, because they've done their work. In fact, the practical impact might actually be positive, because once you've got your cluster closed, you're then looking at what this leads to in terms of accelerated integration. And so we may actually see benefits that we wouldn't have seen previously. I hope that answers the question. If not, I can come back and have another go at it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hudson. Any other written or live questions? Okay. We have a question from Mr. Andras Brown. Since Mr. Zeneli brought up the issue of mini Schengen, in your view, would a stronger form of regional cooperation accelerate the accession process? Do you think that the Visegrad Group, V4, could be a good example for the Western Balkans? How do you see regional relations from the perspective of Albania and Serbia? So Bernard, I guess it's for you.
Well, Uroš, I think it's also for you. Yeah, and also for the speakers from Serbia. They just wrote it down. I think in what I've noticed in terms of the bilateral relations between Serbia and Albania, there has been a tremendous change since Rama came into power. So making the process, I would say, more oriented towards trade and tourism, etc., and moving away from the politics and the issues related to Kosovo and the issue of the Greater Albania. So, and that is, and I think it has contributed to a more, I would consider it a more normal process of discussions between the two countries. Do I think that the Visegrad Group provides a good example? The immediate answer is yes. The thing that I could see problematic in the region is that it's not the same kind of alignment, historic, cultural, etc., that I see in the Visegrad Group compared to the Western Balkans. For example, there has been hesitation from Kosovo to join, and it's not a very clear situation what the mini Schengen would do vis-a-vis other economic and trade agreements that exist. So how this is going to be different from existing agreements? And it has been criticized as a process, as a way for the domestic, or for the leaders in each country to gain more in terms of their political support. So while in the Visegrad Group this does not exist, the countries cooperate and they have already decided how it goes. But as I said, it's not a process. I mean, I've not thought about comparing the two. Let me put it this way.
Thank you, Bernard. And I'm not going to run away from the answer. First, before starting to answer to this question, I would like to ask to the gentleman, to say to the gentleman who asked the question, and to all of you, that I would like to thank him. Thank you, Andras, for helping me getting through Mr. Hudson and finding Mr. Hudson, because it was Andras, as a former stagiaire in the European Commission, who helped me targeting the right person for this conference. And now for the answer to this question, I mainly agree with Bernard, but I will try to be very concrete. Why regional cooperation in terms of cooperation between the countries that are supposed to join the EU in the Western Balkans is a good thing and prerequisite for joining the EU. Two aspects. First, roaming. When you travel to Macedonia, Albania, Montenegro, from the 1st of July this year, you will have zero costs of roaming. Unlike for Croatia, I forget my phone when I go to Croatia, and the same thing is done by my Croatian friends because it's excessively expensive, the roaming between the two countries. We will not have a roaming between those countries. This is an example of good cooperation. Another example of good cooperation is the open borders without any special COVID-related requirements between the same countries. So these are the small examples that influence the everyday life. And we do not need Visegrad 4 or Balkans 4 for that. We don't need an institution whose, by the way, main aim is to undermine the EU. This is the one of the basic aims of Visegrad Group. Let's be straightforward. Okay, there is some cooperation in it, but the main idea is to slow down everything that the rest of the EU countries does. So that's basically my answer to your question. Now we have a question from our colleague Rajko Petrović. How much can the permanent political crisis in Bosnia and Herzegovina affect the European future of the entire Western Balkans region? And it's for me. Well, dear colleague, you couldn't ask a more difficult question. Bosnia is, it's not even a candidate country. There is the main issue is that, if I can be honest, the issue of political elites in all parts of Bosnia and Herzegovina. As far as I understand it, there's such a big problem of leadership and political elites that would be able to define any kind of common goal. Would it be whichever economic policy, not only the EU membership? So the problem is structural, and maybe the future is going to be brighter, but for now, I don't see any positive developments. If someone else is better informed, maybe Iris, I don't know. I see that you're following. What do you, I cannot say more.
Yeah, I share your views, Uroš, but if I understand the question correctly, that there is, this is the background, but the question is actually whether this will impact the enlargement process and the accession negotiations in the whole region, which is a very difficult issue and question, whether the situation in Bosnia or any other country within the Western Balkans will actually slow down the accession or the whole negotiation procedure for all the other countries in the region. And I remember during the Croatian accession negotiations, we started off with Turkey. And that was a huge political concern in Croatia for everybody. Everybody thought, oh my God, we are either never going to get in, or it's going to take ages. It did take ages when you compare, how long it took. It took 10 years compared to previous enlargements. It was longer than ever. So we did strike a record. And, Mr. Hudson mentioned that this is a tendency. But then later on, the accession negotiations and the whole process was divided. So we were no longer considered together with Turkey. And the problem is if you have one or more countries which are going in packages, and then there is a problem with one of them, whether that impacts the others. And you see also what happened with Central and Eastern European countries. There was this decision close to the end of the accession negotiations to keep Romania and Bulgaria longer in the process because simply they weren't ready. So they did accede later on. And for a number of people, they would say that this was still too early. So yeah, but this is more a question for you.
Yeah, thank you, Iris, to complement my answer to Rajko. I don't know if you remember those days before even Croatia started the negotiation process. They were basically two metaphors about countries striving to join the EU. The metaphor of train, and then the metaphor of group of boats. And now I think that neither of the two can be applicable to all those countries. So if Bosnia is not progressing and all other countries are, this is a problem for everyone, but not such a big problem as it used to be in the times Iris was speaking about. So on the other hand, if all the other countries get closer and eventually join, and Bosnia does not, then this is a problem. Can you imagine that Croatia has at least 1,000 kilometers of border with Bosnia? So if Croatia enters the Schengen, Iris, when will it happen? Soon? As far as I know, probably 2023.
Well, Schengen and getting the euro, so getting into the eurozone, are priorities, political priorities in Croatia. This does not mean that we are going to enter Schengen in 2023. As you know, Romania and Bulgaria are also not yet in Schengen. And I think, again, this is a combination of fulfilling certain technical requirements and the political will and political signals on both sides. So I'm not sure that EU member states are going to be willing to let Croatia join Schengen before Romania and Bulgaria, because it could be perceived as unfair on the side of Romania and Bulgaria. I might be wrong, so who knows? And also, you know, as you mentioned, so we have the longest border with a third country. And there have been so many problems with migration influx in 2015, 2016. Currently, the migration pact is being negotiated and it might be stuck again. So I don't see the prospect of joining Schengen soon for Croatia.
Thank you.
But I'm not a political insider.
Yeah, of course. But you have some of them from your very department, given that you are such a successful faculty.
Yeah, but you know, yeah, I have, yeah, my colleagues and my dear friends are at the Court of Justice, but they also are not political insiders in the sense of knowing, you know, what the political leaders in EU member states plan to do.
Maybe David would share with us some internal information from the heart of the system. Okay, so any other questions, dear colleagues? Mr. ĐURKOVIĆ raised his hand. Please, Mr. ĐURKOVIќ.
Yeah, okay, I use this opportunity actually. Thank to everyone, it was really more than useful. And I will start from what our colleague from Albania gave as pretty good, I think, overview to which I think anyone from Serbia, Montenegro, more or less Macedonia would definitely subscribe as the definition of what is really going on, especially COVID crisis has emphasized some problems that were already here. But generally, I have a question for Mr. David Hudson concerning the perception, or let me say, in a way, he spoke a lot about technical details, which definitely have still to be developed in the future. But concerning the, let me see, political background, and as usually people try to see what is going on in behind, there are two schools of thought fluctuating around. The first one says, well, at least people hope for it, that this is the sign that EU and the Commission and the countries that are interested for the enlargement are about to really get serious, in the sense that this might be the signal that there will be the pressure that finally rule of law and corruption problems, judiciary issues, and everything that is usually connected with so-called stabilitocracy start to be tackled and addressed. But there is also the second school of thought, which says, well, this is the sign that EU is sending to everybody, in the sense that, of course, there is a internal crisis, enlargement fatigue, as all we know, and that for some time EU definitely will not be too eager to really expand and so on. So the conditioning will be increased, and the demands with the whole cluster are, of course, much more bigger and more demanding than it used to be with the specific chapters, and especially this year explanation that even the closed chapters might be open within 3 years if the whole process is not finished and so on. So actually that this school of thought thinks that individual leaders and political leadership in the region will say, well, this is what it is, and we will not get too serious. We will continue to play the game that we want to go, and you will play the game that you want to accept us, and so on. So my basic question is actually, what do you think, if I can say a little bit off the record or with speaking with Chatham House rules, which story is more truthful from these two ones? Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question. Listen, no surprise. My reply is going to be the first. There's more truth in the first proposition. I mean, certainly speaking for the Commission, we want this process to go ahead, and we want it to be successful for the region and for the European Union. We see all of the benefits of bringing the region into the European Union, for the region itself, for our member states, and we do want it to happen. And we want it, and in order for that to be the case, I think, yeah, we developed the revised methodology, but I think it's always important to read the revised methodology in conjunction with the Western Balkan strategy. Because, as I said, you know, the revised methodology is process-based. There are a lot of elements that were discussed today about participation of civil society and so on and so forth, or elements which are covered in the strategy. And if you like, the revised methodology is a mechanism to more effectively implement the Western Balkan strategy. So yes, we do want to move forward and move ahead. Now, do all member states share the same vision about the pace of movement? Manifestly not, because there are 27 member states and they're all different and they all have slightly different views and perspectives. What we do know is no member state has actively come out and said, we don't want any accession anymore, ever again. We don't want accession from the region. We don't want accession by this country. None of them has said that. They have all consistently endorsed the existing policies and the previous declarations. And we saw this again in Zagreb. So politically, people want it to happen. The crunch question, of course, is how and when. And what we have sought to do through the revised methodology is create the conditions that provide the reassurance on the EU side by those who are most concerned that, in fact, yes, the things that they want to see happen, democratization, fight against corruption, being at the fore, fight against organized crime, obviously, you know, that they are all dealt with and addressed in a credible manner. And that we can demonstrate to the member states that we as Commission aren't simply saying they're done, that they're actually done. So when you look at the nuts and bolts of both the strategy and the revised methodology, the intention is there in order, if I can phrase it this way, not to give member states an excuse to say no. And as always, you confront the member states with what has been done, you demonstrate that the progress has been made, and then it's through that that you can then move the process forward. And that it's designed to do that. It's not, that's what this is about. It's not about implementing the status quo and maintaining, stability. And if I can have 1 minute on stability. I mean, yes, we have a stabilization and association process, but that's a historical legacy. That concerns the situation in the region 20, 25 years ago, and we all know what stabilization meant in that context. I think there's a lot of discussion about how we favor stability over democracy. But that is demonstrably not the case in practice, because if that were the case, how do you explain what happened in Skopje between 2016, 2017 and today? If the EU favors stability over anything else argument is maintained, then surely there would not have been those changes in what is now North Macedonia. I mean, there was even an EPP-aligned government in office at the time. Yeah. So even the argument that because it's an EPP commission president, and it was at the time, that we are soft on EPP-affiliated countries and we're tougher on the others, even that is not, it was actively refuted by the situation in North Macedonia. So I think when there is a genuine change demanded, and when the people manifest that change through the ballot box, through the existing mechanisms, that we are there to support that process, and we are there to support the will of the people in those countries. And I think that what we do with the revised methodology, is likewise, we are creating conditions that will enable momentum in our accession process. We don't want this to be static. We don't want to create some kind of bubble where things aren't so bad that we have to act, but not so good that we have to make member states. That's not what we want. That's not what we're looking for. And that we are actively trying to move forward within this environment where, as I said, we are not the masters of this. Our member states are ultimately the masters of this. You see the power that individual member states have, and that therefore we have to move the policy in such a way that we can bring them all along with us together. And that's, if we were in the real world and we could have coffee breaks, I'd say, come and speak to me over coffee as well. Unfortunately, we're not, so I'll stop there.
Thank you, Mr. Hudson. Now we have time just for one quick question and quick answer, if there is some. If not, I will abuse this occasion to ask very rapid question to Paweł. If you are still with us, Paweł?
Yes, of course, all the time.
Great, great, great. So your country is in the news all the time recently. So let me ask you probably a sensitive but very interesting question. Do you think that the further difficulties concerning the independence of judiciary and other important political moments happening now in Poland, mainly with the rights to abortion, will influence your future relations with the EU and other member states, but also the EU as a whole? Thank you.
All right, so very difficult question and very tricky one, but I would like to tell you, I would like to answer maybe in such a way. Poland is a state which has many different difficulties and has got very interesting history, and we existed few hundred years ago, and we can exist. We can exist now, and we will exist further. I think that all the political changes which are happening now in Poland and aspects about judiciary and other things, maybe the social aspects. I think that someday this will change on the other side. So I am not afraid, especially about the relations with EU, although maybe it could be a little bit more difficult or harder time, but nevertheless, I don't think it break any relations in such a way that it will be unrealistic to cooperate. Poland is the member state, and every member state has got some problems. If we look into many different member states, we can see also some different difficulties. And I suppose that someday in maybe next elections, the things will go in a different way. So I am not afraid about it.
Thank you very much for your answer. So it's 14:24. It's about time to close this conference. Thank you all, especially all the speakers, for giving us such an interesting and different angles of views and perspectives. Also, thanks to Hans Seidel Foundation and to the Institute of European Studies, and of course to all of you who followed with or without asking questions. See you, I hope, soon in live. Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Uroš. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Hvala vam.
Thank you. Bye. See you.
From our side as well. Thank you, Uroš.